Hey everyone, Eunson here. You just heard me soloing through a little bit of the piece of music that we're going to talk about today. This piece of music has been widely celebrated for many years now. It's famously complex, but it's also dreaded by many musicians, regardless of their instrument, primarily because of its complexity. This piece of music is, of course, John Coltrane's Giant Steps. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of giant steps, how the chord changes actually work, and how the chord changes might not be quite as difficult to solo over as you may have been led to believe. But first, just in case you're not entirely familiar with the sound of these chord changes, here's me soloing over the chord changes to giant steps at a slightly slower tempo. Before we go any further, make sure to hit subscribe down below and click the bell for notifications so you don't miss any of my new videos. And if you've been enjoying my content, consider giving this video a like so we can push it out to as many people as possible. Also, if you'd like to learn my approach to soloing, join me over at bensguitarclub.com, where you can learn with me through my guitar masterclasses and bundle packages, including my very latest, the BGC bundle, featuring all of my masterclasses in one package. We're going to discuss the chord progression behind giant steps in a little more depth in just one moment, but first, let's go over some history. Giant Steps first appeared on the album of the same name by John Coltrane in 1960. This piece of music was initially recorded on March 26, 1959, played at a slightly slower tempo than perhaps what we're used to hearing, but the final version that you actually hear on the record was recorded on May 5th, 1959, featuring Tommy Flanagan on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Art Taylor on drums. John Coltrane himself takes a solo over these chord changes that is undeniably iconic at this point, effortlessly sailing through the chord changes at a tempo of about 290 BPM. However, much has been made of the stop-start nature of Tommy Flanagan's piano solo on Giant Steps. To some extent, perhaps the critique is fair, and while it may not be his best solo, I tend to agree with Nat Hentoff's assessment of Tommy Flanagan's piano solo in that it contrasts John Coltrane's solo beautifully. Since its release, Giant Steps has certainly maintained its status as a legendary piece of music amongst musicians, and being able to navigate the chord changes of Giant Steps has long stood as a good indicator of an improvising soloist's ability regardless of the instrument that they play. This is in large part due to at least two factors, one of which is that Giant Steps is almost always played at a very fast tempo, typically 300 BPM and higher, the second of which is that the chord progression itself is extremely unusual. The composition itself occurs over a 16-bar form, but we can isolate much of what is occurring harmonically within the first 3 bars. The chord progression itself is based on a series of tonal centers occurring in a pattern of descending major thirds, specifically B major, G major, and E flat major. Once we factor in the 5/1 cadences, we're presented with a cycle that sounds a little bit like this. We can start with a B major 7 chord, and then observe a 5/1 cadence into G major. Then we can observe a 5/1 cadence into E flat major. and then a 5/1 cadence back to B major. This example demonstrates how the three tonal centers present in giant steps function. And additionally, it's important to note that between these three tonal centers, moving in descending major thirds, it presents us with an intervallic pattern that forms the basis of an augmented triad: B, G, and E flat. Also from the Giant Steps album, we can observe this same concept of tonal centers moving in a pattern of descending major thirds occurring in a piece of music called Countdown. In Countdown, however, the cycle itself occurs within the context of a 2-5-1 progression, specifically beginning with a 2-5-1 progression in the key of D major. When we implement the major third-based cycle within the context of this 2-5-1, it's going to sound a little more like this. This time, the tonal centers occurring in the countdown cycle that I just played are B flat major, G flat major, and D major. Once again occurring in a pattern of descending major thirds, we can again observe what is essentially an augmented triad starting from the note B flat and descending down to D. Just as we observed with Giant Steps a moment ago, the way that this cycle occurs within a 2-5-1 works as follows. We start off with E minor, which is the minor 2 chord in the key of D major. Next up, we have a 5-1 cadence moving to B flat major. That's followed by a 5-1 cadence moving to G flat major. And then we get back home by playing a 5-1 cadence into D major, thus completing the 2-5-1 progression. John Coltrane's Countdown is originally based on a piece of music that is typically credited to Miles Davis called Tune Up, except it's tune up with a whole lot of major third-based cycles implemented throughout the chord changes. In case you're unfamiliar with Coltrane's Countdown, it's a fantastic companion to Giant Steps itself. Let's do a little bit of soloing over Countdown, once again at a slightly slower tempo. There's no question about the fact that the major third-based cycles heard in Coltrane's Giant Steps and Countdown have forever changed the way that improvised soloists approach soloing over chord changes. As a result, it's caused a lot of people to wonder what on earth could have possibly influenced Coltrane to come up with this brilliant way of thinking. Some have suggested that Coltrane may have been partially influenced by Have You Met Miss Jones, a standard tune from 1937 written by Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart, which features a B section that heavily utilizes a major third approach. Additionally, some have noted motivic similarities between Giant Steps and the first movement of Harold Shapiro's string quartet. And while it's unlikely as to whether we'll ever really know if Coltrane was at all influenced by these pieces of music, It is widely understood that he spent considerable time with Nicholas Slonimsky's thesaurus of scales and melodic patterns, as confirmed by many people including Quincy Jones, as well as pianist, author and historian Louis Porter. Slonimsky's thesaurus is said to have had a large impact on Coltrane's conception of giant steps. But ultimately, I think we must give credit to Coltrane for formulating these major third-based cycles into a compositional form that really had a massive impact on musicians across so many styles of music and continues to have an impact to this day. So how on earth do we solo over giant steps? Now that we've established the major third-based nature of the chord changes themselves, the first place that I start in terms of practicing soloing is with triads. And if you'd like to learn more about triads in general, make sure to check out How to Solo with Triads at bensguitarclub.com. However, specifically within the context of giant steps, rather than looking at the entire 16-bar form of the piece of music today, let's narrow it down to a 4-bar cycle that contains all 3 tonal centers, a little bit like what we played earlier. We're going to be looking at 2 exercises where I'll be connecting triads through this 4-bar cycle, and in your own playing you can extrapolate this type of idea throughout the entire form of giant steps. Here's our first triadic example. I love how clearly you can state the chord changes by just using triads. Let's try our second exercise. For me, connecting arpeggios through chord changes is always the best place to start, and you can continue this same type of process with 7th chord arpeggios as well. I hope you've enjoyed this brief exploration into giant steps. It's certainly one of my favorite pieces to play, and it may well be one of your favorites as well. What approaches have you taken to develop your soloing over giant steps or some other type of major third-based harmony? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like so we can push it out to as many people as possible. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit subscribe down below and click the bell for notifications so you don't miss any of my new playing videos, lesson videos, or discussions about music. Additionally, if you'd like to continue developing your playing, join me at bensguitarclub.com. I'll see you next time.